Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's workshop, Understanding the Human Elements in Your Business, Trust, Collaboration, and Emotional Loss. My name is Steph Avalos-Bach, and I'm facilitating today's workshop with Katie O'Malley, and I'm really excited for her to speak to you. She's the Senior Associate Director of Leadership Development at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and she's a board-certified life and career coach. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be sent to you once it's available. We welcome you to return for additional workshops at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. this week. Full details are on our website at polsky.uchicago.edu, so you can sign up for those. We will be taking Q&A toward the end of the session. There should be a chat box below your video. You can drop questions in there and we will do our best to answer them at the end. And with that, I will turn things over to Katie.
Steph, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I don't know how many folks are here, where folks are here from, but I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get this kicked off. Here we go. All right, so as Steph shared with you this morning, and clearly this is, I'm hoping, what you signed up for, we're here to talk about the human elements within your business and really understanding how these components of who we are as human people really contribute to trust and collaboration in this time where I think a lot of us are experiencing emotional loss and loss in the more standard sense in the way that we think of it. We're in very uncertain times, and uncertain times can create stress. And also have us show up in ways as leaders or team members that aren't really normal for us. And that's to be expected because we are not in a normal time. And so today, I'm hoping that we can really explore and ground ourselves in what it means to be human, just in general, but particularly now as we're moving through a global pandemic. So to kick us off, I always think that it's really important that folks know who it is that they're learning from and alongside. So this is a picture of me as a kiddo. I think it's always fun to show a little bit of vulnerability, who we are, where we've been, and where we've come from. Those are flamingo glasses, and I think I'm trying to be a cross between Madonna and Tiffany in the early '80s. I'm hoping this is Halloween, but no one in my family is really sure. It could have just been a typical day. I tend to be a little bit bold and eccentric, so stick with me as we move through this. But I share this and also want to share a little bit about my background. So my bachelor's degree is in political science. I went to Miami University of Ohio. After that experience, I spent a little time working in politics on the 2004 presidential campaign, and then transitioned into work in the nonprofit sector, where I worked at the Innocence Project out in New York, and then the AIDS Foundation of Chicago back here. Chicago is my home. After spending time trying to create and implement change, meaningful change through work in nonprofit, I found myself feeling not quite so stable financially, and thought, I have tried politics, I have tried nonprofit, maybe these sectors aren't it for me. Why don't I transition into the corporate sector, where I went to go work at a commercial real estate firm called CBRE. Had I visited a career center at any point during college, they would have said this is not going to be a good fit for you, but did not know that. So as a very experiential learner, just kept trying out new things until I found a hat that fit right. And so spent about 3.5 years at CBRE. And at that point determined it's time for me to go back to school at 30 years old and go get my master's degree in counseling. What I realized is that direct service and helping folks identify who they are so that they can live and lead an authentic life was actually something that was really important to me and really motivating to me. So went to DePaul University here in Chicago to earn my master's degree in counseling. And after that was done, was hired by the University of Texas at Austin in their Leadership and Ethics Institute. And so spent about 2 years at UT Austin working with students, graduate students, faculty, and staff in their leadership development and creating leadership education programming, but decided it was time to come home after just a few short years, and was lucky enough to find the opportunity that I have now in the Leadership Development Office at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Here, I really spend my time working with our full-time MBA students in our Leadership Effectiveness and Development course, our Leadership Practicum course, and the Booth Women Lead Hership program. Being at the University of Chicago is also when I earned my board certification in coaching. As Steph shared, I have my BCC in executive coaching and leadership coaching, and have also formed a partnership with the Polsky Center where I do workshops like this, and also do mentorship. As a quick note too, I have a private coaching practice called Encourage Coaching, where I see private clients on the weekends to help them work through their career and leadership development goals. Now, thank you for sitting with me through this. The reason that I share it all is actually twofold. One, I truly believe who we are and our lived experience informs how we lead, how we love, how we're able to work alongside other people. And so to negate who we are and just say we're going to lead our teams now without thinking about all of the experiences that we have that are really integrated into the way that we're showing up alongside others, I think would be irresponsible. But also, right now, we're at a really unique time in human history where, while we all have our unique lived experiences, right, and our own histories, right now we're having a shared experience and feeling this sense of connectivity and collectivity in a way and on a scale that is so expansive and global, because we're all going through the same experience right now. Now, granted, what we're going to work through today is, while the experience is the same, the feelings, the thoughts, the behaviors that result from that experience are quite unique to us. However, there is some commonality in our own humanness, and that's what I'm hoping we can start to explore today, so you can better understand how you're showing up for your teams and for your clients, even in your own personal life with your partners and your family and your friends, but also recognizing this is a unique moment that we can intentionally reframe this so we can come out the other side stronger, more whole, and continuing these practices that really build trust and maintain connection. So I'm hoping to cover all three of those today. Please be jotting down questions as we go. I will do my best, as Steph said, to answer as many as possible. Also open to connecting after if there are questions that do not get answered. But this is our agenda for today. And, one of the things that you saw on that agenda was this idea of back to basics. What does it mean to be a human person? And there's this brilliant guy, this brilliant neuroscientist. His name's Antonio Damasio, and he's written several books on neuropsychology and cognitive neuroscience. And one of his favorite quotes of mine is, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think." We fancy ourselves cognitive beings as humans when we compare ourselves to the rest of the animal world, but the truth is we have evolved to feel first, think second, and behave third. So essentially, everything is a feeling before it's a thought, and everything is a thought before it's a behavior. So our goal right now is to really understand, what are those feelings that underlie the thoughts and cognitions that we're having? What are encouraging our team members to explore? What are the feelings that they're having that really underlie their thoughts and behaviors. And the same with your clients or guests. It's so important to remember we have a lot of control over the way that we show up through our thoughts and our behaviors. But in order to exert that control, we first have to understand. Have to understand our emotions and our feelings. Folks have been feeling a lot of things lately, and I wish we were all together in person. One, so I can see the nonverbal cues of if you're sticking with me, or if there are questions that are popping up, or just even having the opportunity to share out in a large group. But what I've been hearing from our students, from my friends and family, from my clients, is that people are feeling a lot of feelings right now, and they're hard to identify. The reason for that is we are experiencing a collection of feelings right now, and it's the many stages of grief. So stick with me for a moment. When we think about grief, we often think about it as the loss of a person, right, or the loss of a family pet. And I'm not trying to in any way say that the losses we are going through now is the same as human loss, but it is emotional loss, right? Which is part of the title of this workshop. And when we experience emotional loss or the end of something, what we actually go through are the stages of grief. So many of you may be familiar with these. We start out in denial, move into a period of anger, then bargaining, then sadness, and finally acceptance. I would love to tell you that it's this neat and clean, and we just go through this cycle, and once we've hit acceptance, we're all done. Unfortunately, it's a lot more messy than that, and folks will often bounce between these 5 stages. And so one of the things to be mindful of, and I encourage you to think about, is to practice self-compassion, right? If you find yourself feeling a wave of sadness when you thought you had already accepted the state and the situation that we find ourselves in globally, and you just keep experiencing that sadness, it's okay. It is normal. And it's, if the more we resist a feeling or resist one of these stages, the more ever present it becomes and the greater the stress becomes. So if we're to think about the stages of grief in terms of the pandemic that we're experiencing, the first stage is denial, right? This isn't going to impact me. COVID-19 isn't going to impact me, my family, my business, right? The first stage is denial. The next, anger. I don't know how many of you experienced this, but I'm raising my hand for how could they cancel everything? All of my plans are canceled. All of them are canceled. All of my workshops and classes are canceled. I am so angry about this, right? Anger, these things, for the moment, taking priority over our health and well-being. Then into bargaining. If I do X, Y, Z, right? If I socially distance, or if I shelter in place for these 2 weeks, this will all be over. It'll all be good. I'll just stay home. It's going to be fine. And then moving into sadness. Oh man, I don't know when shelter in place will end. I don't know when social distancing is going to end. And we feel this wave of sadness, right? Finally, moving into acceptance. This is real. We're going to do the best that we can do. We're going to do the best that we can do as individuals, as a group, as a community. And so even with this recognition, as they keep in varying cities and states moving the timeline, for me, even today, seeing that Austin, Texas has moved their shelter in place back to May 8th, I'm thinking, oh, maybe we're going to be out of this by April 30th and starting in denial again, right? This will not impact me. This will not be the way that it is for us. And so as you're moving through and you find yourself feeling these various things, sit with it for a moment, right? Don't push it away. Embrace it. Try not to judge it, and recognize we're all going through this. This is the shared collective moment that we're all having. The important thing to know about grief is that it often causes us to feel stress, right? And particularly right now, where we are in experiencing stress and experiencing a global pandemic in a way most of us have not experienced in our lifetime. And so the stress of that, that feeling of stress as humans causes us to respond in one of three ways. Now, I'm putting these three broad categories out there, but what these look like for you could be really different. So consider as I'm walking through which of these three categories do you find yourself kind of leaning into the most as you respond to stress, which is often unintentional, and what are the triggers for that? Like I said, we really cannot control the way that we feel. We've evolved to have feelings first, right? And then thoughts. But if we can identify the triggers that cause the feelings, we become in much more control of the thoughts and behaviors that follow. So the first way that humans respond to stress, the category is called moving away, right? So back in the 1950s, this brilliant female psychologist, her name's Dr. Karen Horney, really looked at what are the three ways that humans respond to stress. And the first is moving away. Sometimes we think about this as the flight response, right? Moving away often looks like us withdrawing, hiding, keeping our thoughts, ideas, feelings to ourselves, often keeping secrets, because we're just trying to create distance between us and the stress, or not create any more stress by engaging in any way at all, essentially. And so one of the ways that you might be responding, or that you might see your employees responding, is in this moving away capacity. The important thing to remember is this is not you, this is not them, this is not me all of the time. It's us during times of stress, which is what we're experiencing right now. So if you have an employee, right, that you experience practicing this moving away response, I encourage you to try and engage them and get curious. Do what you can to create a space that allows them to feel brave enough to share what it is that they're feeling and to stop withdrawing, right? The next is moving against. Moving against is really looking at you in times of stress, trying to gain power over others, typically in a very aggressive way. And so moving against can look like creating unnecessary conflict, picking fights, being unwilling to let go of your perspective or idea. And that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end, it can be quite aggressive, right? And hurtful, and cause people, actually, instead of you moving away from them, you're pushing them away from you. So this is often what we think of as the fight response, right? I'm gonna dig my heels in and fight for this. And finally, and this is the third one that I think people are less familiar with, it's called moving toward. Moving toward is an approval response, and is very much looking at how can we please and appease others in order to calm our own stress. Moving toward is one of my strongest stress responses. I need to hear from my supervisor that I'm doing a great job, and that all of these extra things that I'm doing, right, all of this extra productivity that I have at home, right, is being recognized and rewarded. And even if it isn't, I keep doing it because it's a coping mechanism. I hope for those of you who are out there and listening, that you are taking care of yourselves during this time in whatever way that it means. But the moving toward response tends to have us going over and above in order to gain approval from others. If you have employees that are doing this, again, how are you encouraging them to take time for themselves? Let them know that they are safe. Let them know whatever it is that they may need to know. And again, that takes getting curious about who they are and what it is they're experiencing. So not either for yourself, consider which of these three categories of stress response do you tend to gravitate most towards, and be on the lookout for employees that might be exhibiting some of these behaviors and try and open up a dialogue with them. Are we good? See, this is a moment where if we were all together, I could be like, are we good? Can we move on? And I would get thumbs up and we could go. So I'm gonna go, but if you have questions about this, again, write them down and we'll get them answered. So while these responses are not intentional, they do open us up to risk. And they open us up to risk because there's volatility involved in those, right? How I typically show up and how I show up under stress, either moving away, moving against, or moving toward, those are two very different things. And folks, right now, with all of the uncertainty in the world, the added layer of uncertainty now is, how is this person going to show up? How am I going to show up? And it feels quite uncertain, which, when we think about it, begins to really impede our effectiveness and erodes our relationship quality. When we are talking about building trust and creating containers and space for people to feel safe and brave during this really uncertain time, our relationship quality better be strong, right? And so part of that, one, recognizing what your stress responses are and what triggers them. Two, owning them. And then three, having really powerful conversations about what trust can look like on your team in this really uncertain time, and committing to it. And so if we're going to enhance relationship quality instead of erode it, what we really need to do is explore the anatomy of trust. And so there is a brilliant woman. Her name is Dr. Brene Brown. I am a super fangirl. My hope is lots of you already know of her and have read some of her stuff. But if you haven't, I encourage you to look her up when this is all done. But Dr. Brene Brown is a PhD in, has her PhD and also her master's degree in social work. And her entire career has been focused around researching vulnerability, connection, shame, resiliency, all things that we tend to think of as this is something that affects an individual, right? And an individual needs to work through this alone. But it turns out, like I've shared before, and what Dr. Brene Brown writes about is who we are is how we lead. So I, as an individual, experiencing all of these different things and choosing to either show up in a vulnerable way or not, really impacts how I lead and tells others how they're allowed to show up too. And so in Dare to Lead, what Brene Brown gives us is a framework to really set up ourselves and our team for success when it comes to not just establishing an environment of trust, but also maintaining it. And so the first is the establishment of boundaries, which we're going to go through all of these one by one. So I'm just going to run through the list really quick so you can see the fun acronym. The first is boundaries. The next is reliability. The third is accountability. Fourth is vault. Then integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. The acronym that she uses is braving, right? We are braving the uncertainty. We are braving vulnerability in order to build the trust and establish the connections that are going to allow our team, our organization, our community to thrive. And so I think Katie or Steph, maybe even Nima, sent out an email about an hour ago that included a worksheet from me that really looks at these 7 dimensions of trust. And what I'd encourage you to do now is bring that out, because as we go through, what I want you thinking about for yourself is, what do my boundaries look like? What does it look like for me to be reliable or accountable or demonstrate integrity? So as we go through these one by one, jot down some notes for yourself. And I also encourage you to use this tool with your team, right? And get the individuals on your team thinking about these different elements of trust for themselves, and then have a dialogue about it as a group. So first, we have boundaries. Dr. Brene Brown writes, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. Her research indicates that the #1 reason people are reluctant to set boundaries is because they're afraid they're going to upset or disappoint someone. The second greatest reason people fail to set boundaries is because they're afraid it will make them unlikable. The truth is, when we don't set boundaries, those are the 2 responses that we get. People develop resentment when they don't know what the boundaries are, and it creates that sense of dislike or a distaste in your mouth for that other person. Truly, when we think about boundaries, it's about being clear for yourself what is acceptable, what is not. Being clear for the team what is acceptable, what is not. And when we have that clarity, we can feel very confident proceeding within the dimensions of that sandbox we've just created, right? As humans, believe it or not, we actually love boundaries. And the reason for this is because we need something to push against. So what I will say is, when we establish boundaries, I want you to do it and do it confidently. Also do it kindly. It doesn't have to be aggressive or assertive, right? Starting using the sentence starter of, one of the things that I really need to feel brave in this space is X. Or one of the things that I really need to feel as though I can speak up in this space is Y. And so set those boundaries. We will all push up against them from time to time. And the important part of when that happens is that you keep the boundary, right, as the establisher of it. I don't know how many Seinfeld fans we have out there, but there is an episode where Jerry Seinfeld makes a car reservation and he goes to get his rental car, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we got your reservation. We didn't keep it, and there's no car for you." And he gets very disappointed and frustrated, right? So as we see in this 3rd bullet point here, anyone can set a boundary. The differentiator are the folks that can actually keep that boundary, much like a car reservation, because that's something, again, that creates trust. Otherwise, clarity gets diminished, confidence gets diminished, and the person who set the boundary feels disrespected. So boundaries. Think about what boundaries you can be setting for yourself. And boundaries don't always have to be negative, right? The examples that I gave are quite enabling. So think about for yourself what boundaries are enabling for you and your team. Next, we have reliability. There is a great acronym, DWY-SYWD. It is the same forwards and backwards. I don't know if you caught that, but it's essentially do what you say you're going to do. Reliability is a cornerstone of trust. And I think that we all know that, but let your boundaries be your guide here, and beware of the overpromise. So self-awareness is a key component of reliability. What are my skills? What are my competencies and talents? What is my bandwidth right now? Which might look different than it did when we weren't in a time of crisis, right? Because we have all of these other things happening. So when I say beware of the overpromise, what we never want to do is overpromise and underdeliver. So again, this goes hand in hand with boundaries, being able to say what you are able to do, and being able to deliver on that. And if you can't do it, that's okay. And being able to share that with the team and making it safe for your team members to not feel like they constantly have to overpromise. Because again, if we overpromise, underdeliver, it really chips away at trust. Accountability. So Dr. Brene Brown, she does these really great animated videos, and I should be able to get them to Katie or Steph to send out to you afterwards. But she does this really great animated narrated video on blame, where she says blame is simply the discharge of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. When we choose blame over owning our own mistakes, demonstrating remorse, and making actionable amends, we are actually deteriorating the trust on our team, right? Similarly, if a team member of yours takes ownership and takes accountability and you blame them anyway after they enact these 3 steps, it again is really going to erode trust and erode relationship quality. Now, this is an important time to think back to those three ways that humans respond to stress, right? Moving away, moving against, and moving towards. When we blame, we do it in times of discomfort and pain and stress. And so being very careful around this one, to not show up in this way that is going to cause you to blame others, because it is the stress response, right? Which would very much be this moving against response. Instead, if someone owns their mistakes or you own your own mistakes, having that be enough, because it is. Next, there is what we are calling the vault. The vault is where confidences are kept, right? And so if we think about trust at a very basic level, someone tells you a secret, you need to keep that secret in order to keep that person's trust, right? And their confidence, again, that you are reliable and accountable and you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And so if a member of your team shares something with you, making sure that you hold that in confidence, or at minimum, ask for permission from them before sharing it with somebody else. One of the things that's really important to note here is sometimes people deal in secrets as a type of power currency, and that is the last thing we need to be doing right now, to ourselves or to each other. So being sure to keep the confidences of others, and just owning that it's hard to do. We know the saying, secrets are no fun. We gotta keep them, especially right now. Next up is integrity. Integrity is choosing courage over comfort. And to be courageous really means to show up as your most authentic self, to be seen, and in doing that, giving permission for other people to be seen and heard for who they are. Often, as Brene Brown says, choosing courage over comfort. It's usually not the right thing or the easy thing or the fast or fun thing, but it is the thing that's going to demonstrate integrity and build trust. One of the workshops that I've done for Polsky in the past is around developing a set of team values that you can really make decisions around. Integrity, as we talk about it here, and especially during this time, is a great opportunity to revisit your individual values and your values as a team, so that you can follow and practice those consistently. The last piece of this, and I mentioned it just shortly, is choosing courage over comfort means letting people see you now. It is this great experiment in vulnerability, right? I am sitting here in my kitchen hoping or like my kitchen dining room, hoping that my dogs don't dash down, you know, and disrupt everything, that I am a little more nervous and off my game than I might be, just because of the times that we're in. And being able to say these things out loud, one, feels like a relief for us, but two, it gives permission for other people to do it too. And this is what we're hoping that you're going to be able to do on your teams, right? Give people the space to show up as who they are, in their whole life, because there is very little separation these days of work and life, right? We're all at home doing this work. And so making sure that you recognize that, let people know that you see it, and also letting them see you too, to a level of vulnerability that is tolerable for you. Next up, non-judgment. As a counselor and coach, this is one of the things that we are taught to enact as quickly as possible. And what I will say is that it is super hard to do. And I think that's why they introduce it in the field so early on, because we are wired to make judgments, right? To make judgments, to recognize patterns. Every time we do that, there's a chemical release in the brain saying, good job, you just recognized a pattern, which makes it very difficult for us to break our relationship with making judgments. And so typically, if you're looking for a way to really identify what some of these might be for you, is that we tend to judge people in the areas where we feel the most insecure, where we feel the most shame. And we tend to not judge people in areas where we feel the most competent. And so on your team, having a relatively vulnerable conversation to say, hey, I don't feel super strong in these areas, and I recognize I might be judging you for what I view as my shortcomings, right? Or I feel super competent in these areas. How can I help you to feel more competent in these areas where you may not? And so in thinking about this idea, imperfections are not inadequacies, they are reminders that we are all in this together. Framing the conversation as, you know, we all have our areas of expertise. We also all have our growing edges where we can improve, and letting those be known, right? It helps with reliability and accountability. None of these 7 dimensions of braving exist in isolation. They all build on each other. So being able to harken back to earlier dimensions is going to be really helpful as you go through this for yourself, but also as you have these conversations with your team. And finally, generosity. So when we think about generosity in the braving framework, it's 2 things. One, it is providing the most generous interpretation possible of another person's words or actions. And 2, it's truly believing that people are doing the best that they can, and there is not malintent behind what they're doing. And so I was sharing this with Steph, Katie, and Nima when we got on the call today, and I was working on these slides last night. And it occurred to me, I was like, you know what, I am doing the very best that I can. Everyone else is doing the very best that they can do, and it is enough. It has to be. And this was around 10 o'clock when I was still working on these slides, to make sure that you all were going to have a really good experience, and that this was going to be worth your time. And so I just kept repeating this to myself so I could get to sleep last night instead of having that stress wheel spinning. And so I share this because the recognition from me to you, I know you're doing the best you can with your teams. I hope that you can recognize within your teams, they're also doing the very best that they can do. And right now it's enough because it has to be. Practicing self-compassion, self-kindness, warmth. These are all of the ways that we can really connect with our teams to create something that's even more powerful on the other side of this. What I'll say is, Next steps would be completing this worksheet for yourself, but also asking members of your team to complete it too. I think these slides are going to be sent out, and hopefully the recording, so they can watch if they need a sense of how to really move through this worksheet. But the more important thing is the conversation that you have around it, and what does trust look like on your team. Again, this idea of commitment is important. So once you talk about these things, you've essentially created all of the boundaries, right, for your team, for your startup, for your organization or company. And the differentiator between your team, organization, and company and others is your ability to keep those boundaries, right? So this is not a checklist for now. This is a checklist forever, and it's something I encourage you to revisit. Right? It's something that should be malleable, but also that you are committed to as an individual and as a team. Most of what I talked about today came from these three sources, spanning from 1950 to 2020. But I highly recommend Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. And if you're curious to learn more about grief, this is a great article in the Harvard Business Review that highlights a psychologist who has spent his whole career working and studying grief. So two great resources there. I think we're about at a quarter till, and I think this is when question time is supposed to start. So I am happy to field whatever questions you have for me. And thank you so much for spending the last 45 minutes in this space with me this morning.
Katie, that was fantastic. And I think that you touched on a lot of things that we can do for each other, as well as things that we need ourselves that maybe we all didn't totally have words for, that I need, and now I need to go ask someone for. So I think that was super helpful. And I'm excited to dig into the references. I want to encourage everybody to think of good questions while we have this fantastic speaker with us, and drop them in the chat below the video. But we do have some to get us started with, which I'm
awesome.
So the first one is, in the slide Back to Basics, can you talk more about moving against and how that manifests?
Sure. Let me scoot back to basics. If I can get back to the slide. Here we go. Yeah, so moving against. So moving against is equivalent to in fight or flight. It's the fight response, right? When we have people, when we work with people, or we are people, where our stress response is moving against, oftentimes it can show up as aggression, as frustration, as being intentionally difficult to work with, or to move an idea forward. If a person is unwilling to compromise, and it seems unclear why they might be willing to do that's a way that moving against manifests. Moving against also manifests as people taking up too much space in the room and not allowing for other people to use their voice. Trying to think of a few other ways. It's really anything that serves as a barrier to progress when we think about moving against at the at one end of the spectrum. At another end of the spectrum, like I said, it can look really aggressive, and people picking fights, picking conflicts, creating unnecessary conflict. And so being able to say, hey, this isn't how I normally experience you in the workday. What's going on here? What are the stressors that might be causing you to behave in these ways? Because this is not how I know you. And making it okay to say this is a crazy time, and these behaviors are not what we are used to seeing from you. And so being able to have an open conversation about that and invite the conversation, right? When I talk about curiosity as a coach, it really goes to that non-judgment place, but it's how can we become super curious and really listen with an open mind and exquisitely listen to what somebody else has to say about what's going on, because we can learn a lot. Steph?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Apartment disruptions as we do.
It's okay. It's okay.
We've got some more, which is great. So the next one is spotting patterns in people's behavior is also a good skill to allocate responsibilities. And is there a conflict here?
Can you read it one more time?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand this. Spotting patterns in people's behavior is also looked at as a good skill to allocate responsibilities. So maybe they're asking, sort of identifying what certain people are good at is a good way to distribute responsibilities around a team.
Yeah, so I wonder, because one of the things that I talked about in non-judgment, right? We want to suspend our judgment, stay out of judgment when we're using the braving framework. I agree. Being able, to the person who wrote this question, being able to recognize the skills, the strengths, the talents in others, right? That is something we want you to continue to do as leaders, right? Because when you can recognize that and help folks cultivate and nurture and develop in particular areas of strength, great leaders develop more leaders. Yes, that is what we want you to do. When I talk about patterns, recognizing patterns, what I'm talking more about is bias, and less about the positive stuff and more about the assumptions that we make because someone is behaving in X, Y, or Z way. The negative assumptions that we make, less so on the other side. So yes, we want you to continue recognizing the brilliance in others and helping them to nurture and cultivate that brilliance. What I'm encouraging against is you not recognizing the bias you have in yourself for how people might be showing up and making a judgment based on that bias. I wasn't super clear when I went through that slide, so thank you. Thank you for that question. I hope my response helps.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot. Thank you. The next one from our own Katie here. When we have feelings that are uncomfortable or stressful and we're inclined to resist those hard feelings, what are some strategies we can use to mitigate that, pushing against those feelings so we can sort of deal with them in a productive way?
Yeah, Katie, this is a great question. One of my favorite strategies comes from research on self-compassion. There's a great woman. Her name is Dr. Kristen Neff. I encourage you to look her up. Her website is actually selfcompassion.org, so relatively easy to remember. But one of the ways to really sit with those tough feelings and to not judge them or push them away is to externalize the feeling. And so when we feel something, right, we tend to feel it in a certain place in our body. Sometimes it's our hearts, our neck, our shoulders, our belly, our legs. All of us feel it in different spots, but trying to identify where in your body you're feeling that discomfort. And almost for me, it's always in my heart. I will get a very poundy heart when I'm feeling discomfort. And it might sound hippy dippy, but what is very helpful is I pull it off, right? Here is the feeling, here's the discomfort. And then you basically approach it with curiosity, just like you would another person, and compassion. And I'll say, my goodness, I am giving you all this little window into my life, but hey, heart, I care about your well-being, and I see that you're suffering. How can I make you feel better? What is this feeling of discomfort? I'm going to tear up doing this because it's really powerful. But really approaching that discomfort with curiosity and interrogating is a pretty volatile, aggressive word to use, but interrogating that discomfort, right? Where is it coming from? And letting whatever body part you have know that you care for it, and that you hope you can help it feel better. Katie, what do we think of that?
Sorry, I was delayed because I was writing it down so fast.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the advice.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous. I think I'm excited for this next question too. I'm going to combine two questions. And so these guys are asking us to dig into the moving against tendency, to understand a little bit more why people do it. Is there some sort of power that we're looking to gain? Maybe we feel a little bit out of control. So why do we do this? And then in addition to having supportive and open conversations, what are some tools for people who find themselves moving against as a coping mechanism?
Sure. So hearing those two questions, one is a why, and then what are tools to combat it. And the interesting thing that I'm beginning to wonder is, with these moving against questions, it sounds like perhaps folks either behave in this way when they're under stress, or they have team members that behave in this way. What's interesting is that so there is an assessment. It's called the Hogan Development Survey, and it really looks at human responses to stress in these 3 ways, but it breaks it out into 11 different categories. And so the why people move against instead of moving away or moving toward, that's part of our it's part of our genetic makeup, right? These are the ways we've been both genetically tailored to respond, but also environmentally. So it's a little bit of nature and a little bit of nurture. But the why for moving against, in addition to it being a stress response, oftentimes it's also a shame response. And so if there are things in our life that we do not feel super great about, or outcomes and things that we've done that we also don't feel really great about, sometimes the shame is a motivator for the moving against response to emerge. So an example that Brene Brown gives is, you've taken your grandmother to the doctor and you dropped her off, and then you went to go run some other errands, and you come back and you see your grandmother sitting outside the doctor's office, and it's cold and it's rainy. And instead of taking responsibility for, hey, I went and ran these errands and now I'm late, you say, hey, there was no reason for me to show up on time because you never show up on time for anything, Grandma. I can't imagine any of us talking to our grandparents in that way, but that could be for anybody, right? And so it's this discharge of blame, coming from a place of, I know I did wrong, but I can't sit with that discomfort, so I'm going to discharge it onto somebody else. The greatest tool that we have, whether it's the moving against response, moving away, or moving toward, the greatest tool that we have is deepening our self-awareness around our own individual triggers, right? So while these 3 categories are basic human responses, the trigger for each of us as individuals is quite different, right? And so for me, my moving toward response comes out when I feel a lack of self-confidence, when a lack of self-confidence or a lack of certainty or stability. That's my trigger. With moving away and putting distance between myself and another situation is typically when I feel backed into a corner. My moving away or moving against response will show up. So in terms of tools, identifying what your triggers are for any of these three is probably the best strategy that you have. And it takes a lot of reflection, but I would also encourage you to reach out to folks that you trust and say, hey, when you've seen me under stress, what do you see of me, right? So you can get a sense of which of these you gravitate most towards, and then you can begin thinking about what were the steps leading up to those behaviors that this person noted that might have had me responding in that way.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah.
One more here. When it comes to drawing boundaries, will I create distrust if I realize I'm unable to keep and I like to change? How will one approach and the change to continue to keep trust and minimize conflict?
Okay, so boundaries can absolutely be malleable, and they have to be, because as humans, we're not robots. We are quite dynamic, and our lived experiences change us, and just our day-to-day experiences can change us. And so this is an opportunity for the person who asked this question, right? You've established a boundary, and now you recognize, oh man, I need to change this boundary. It is not serving me anymore. This is an opportunity for you to practice accountability and say, hey, I know I established this boundary. I recognize it is no longer serving me in the way that I thought it would, or that I hoped it would, and I want to take responsibility for that as I establish a new boundary with you, right? It is okay to do that, but it's recognizing that you've made a mistake. And so when we make mistakes, it's not the mistake that breaks the trust. It is the inability to take accountability for that mistake, and continue to demonstrate an effort in, how am I trying to say this? An inability to demonstrate consistency moving forward and when I say consistency, it's not consistency in the boundary at that point, it's consistency in your own accountability toward that boundary. And this is where I would say, does that make sense? And you could say yes or no, but I can't see you.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
I'm hearing a really important theme throughout a lot of this, just about communication.
Yes.
And if we need things, if we feel things, if they change, when they change, just communicate.
Yes.
And then we all have so much more information to work with than we usually do. So I've got a final question, which I think is a great place to end. What are some questions we can ask ourselves to deepen our self-awareness of our triggers?
Ooh, yes. This is a great question. So the first question to ask yourself, and it's really more of a visualization, is think about the last time that you behaved in a way you didn't like, and start to visualize what you were feeling in your body, what was happening around the time of that behavior that you didn't like, what led up to you behaving in that way. That'll give you a lot of really important information and data about at least one trigger, right? One data point. And then you can start saying, does this show up in other places or in other ways? And if you find yourself saying, oh man, I have never showed up or demonstrated a behavior that I didn't like, what I would encourage you to do is ask yourself the question, what am I pretending not to know right now? Because these things are exceptionally uncomfortable to think about, because we often don't want to face these behaviors in ourselves, or the shame that might underlie them. And so whenever you feel stuck, whether it is in a decision-making process, or trying to demonstrate compassion towards yourself or towards somebody else, asking yourself the question, what am I pretending not to know right now, can give you some really powerful answers.
I love that question. I love that. What are you pretending not to know? Because we do know. I think
we do know. We know very, very well and very deeply. We just don't like to say it out loud.
Yep. Well, thank you again, Katie, for a fantastic presentation. I can clap. by myself here. I'm sure others could too. We will send out the recording and I think the slides afterwards when they're ready. Zoom takes a little bit of time to process it on their end. And then we welcome everyone to continue joining us this week for the rest of the series. More info on our website. Have a wonderful day, everyone.